Karen shot my wife and baby in our yard. She thought we were poor people breaking her neighborhood rules. She didn't know I own all 50,000 acres around here. She just made the biggest mistake of her life shooting my family. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pine trees as I sat on the porch of our small cabin, watching my wife Sarah tend to our 6-month-old daughter Emma in the meadow nearby. The peaceful silence was broken only by Emma's gentle laughter and the distant sound of birds singing. This was our sanctuary, our escape from the chaos of city life. What I didn't expect was that this perfect morning would become the worst day of my life. Sarah had always loved this place. When we first discovered the old cabin 3 years ago, she fell in love with its rustic charm and the endless wilderness surrounding it. "This feels like home," she had whispered, her eyes sparkling with joy. I bought the cabin immediately, not knowing then that it sat in the heart of a 50,000-acre ranch that my grandfather had left me in his will. The lawyers had been trying to reach me for months about the inheritance, but I had been too busy with work to pay attention to legal documents. The trouble started when Karen Hutchinson moved into the area 6 months ago. She had purchased a small plot of land about 2 miles from our cabin and immediately appointed herself as the head of a newly formed Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. Karen was the type of woman who believed rules existed to be enforced, especially by her. She was tall and thin with sharp features and an even sharper tongue. Her gray hair was always pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore the expression of someone who had never experienced a moment of genuine joy. Karen's first visit to our cabin had been unpleasant. She arrived unannounced on a Tuesday morning, carrying a clipboard and wearing a scowl that could sour milk. "You're in violation of HOA regulations," she announced without introduction. "This cabin is an eyesore. The paint is peeling, there are weeds in your yard, and that old truck of yours is bringing down property values." I had stared at her in confusion. "Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake. We never joined any HOA. Everyone in Whispering Pines is automatically enrolled," she snapped. "I've filed the proper paperwork with the county. You have 30 days to bring this property up to standard or face legal action." Sarah had appeared beside me, Emma in her arms. "This is our home," she said softly. "We love it just the way it is." Karen's eyes had narrowed as she looked at my wife and daughter. "Young lady, sentiment doesn't override property values. This is a community now and we all have to do our part." That was the beginning of a nightmare that would escalate beyond anything I could have imagined. Over the following months, Karen made our lives miserable. She filed complaint after complaint with the county, claiming everything from noise violations to improper waste disposal. None of her claims were valid, but each one required time and money to fight. She organized the other new residents against us, spreading rumors that we were problem neighbors who didn't care about the community. The harassment intensified when Sarah refused to remove the small vegetable garden she had planted behind the cabin. Karen claimed it was unsightly and violated HOA aesthetic guidelines. When Sarah continued to tend her tomatoes and herbs, Karen began showing up at our property unannounced, taking photographs and making notes on her clipboard. "She's making me nervous," Sarah confessed one evening as we watched Emma play on a blanket in the living room. "The way she looks at us, at Emma, it's not normal." I should have taken Sarah's concerns more seriously. I should have done something to stop Karen before things went too far. But I believed that reason would eventually prevail, that Karen would realize she was being unreasonable and back down. I was wrong. The situation reached a breaking point 3 weeks ago when Karen arrived with 2 men she claimed were HOA enforcement officers. They were actually just friends of hers from town, but they acted with an authority they didn't possess. "We're here to conduct an inspection," Karen announced, pushing past me into our cabin. "You don't have the right to enter our home," I protested, but she ignored me. Karen and her companions spent an hour going through our cabin, making notes and taking photographs. They criticized everything from the placement of our furniture to the type of light bulbs we used. When Sarah asked them to leave, one of the men became aggressive. "Lady, you need to understand that Karen is trying to help you people," he said, stepping closer to Sarah in a way that made my blood boil. "Either you cooperate, or we'll make sure you're forced to cooperate." That was when I lost my temper. I physically escorted all 3 of them off our property and told them never to return. Karen's parting words still echo in my mind, "You'll regret this. I'll make sure you lose everything." True to her word, Karen escalated her campaign against us. She somehow obtained a restraining order claiming we had threatened her, which prevented us from going into town for supplies. She convinced the local sheriff that we were dangerous, leading to several wellness checks that terrified Sarah and Emma. Most cruelly, she began spreading rumors that we were unfit parents, leading to an unexpected visit from Child Protective Services. The CPS worker was kind and quickly realized that Emma was healthy, happy, and well cared for. But the investigation was traumatic for Sarah, who spent days worrying that someone might try to take our daughter away. "I can't take much more of this," Sarah told me one night as we lay in bed listening to Emma sleep in her crib beside us. "She's trying to destroy our family." "I won't let that happen," I promised, holding my wife close. "We'll figure something out." But I was running out of options. The legal fees were mounting, and Karen seemed to have unlimited resources and time to make our lives miserable. Worse, her behavior was becoming increasingly erratic and threatening. She had begun parking at the end of our driveway for hours, just watching our cabin through binoculars. When I confronted her about it, she claimed she was monitoring HOA compliance. The breaking point came yesterday morning when I discovered that Karen had poisoned Sarah's vegetable garden. Every plant was dead, the leaves blackened and twisted. Sarah cried when she saw the destruction, not just for the lost vegetables, but for what it represented. "She killed them," Sarah whispered, kneeling beside the ruined tomato plants she had lovingly tended for months. "She killed them just to hurt me." That's when I decided to call the lawyers who had been trying to reach me about my grandfather's inheritance. If I was going to fight Karen, I needed to understand exactly what resources I had available. The conversation with the lawyer changed everything. "Mr. Johnson, your grandfather's ranch encompasses 50,000 acres, the lawyer explained. "Your cabin sits right in the center of it. The property includes mineral rights, water rights, and several easements. You're not just a homeowner, you're one of the largest landowners in the county." I was stunned. "Are you telling me that I own all the land around here?" "According to the survey, your property extends approximately 15 miles in every direction from your cabin. The plot that Ms. Hutchinson purchased? She's technically your tenant. Everyone in what she calls Whispering Pines is living on your land." The irony was breathtaking. Karen had been harassing us for months, trying to force us off property that we actually owned. Her entire HOA was built on land that belonged to me. But before I could process this information fully, before I could confront Karen with the truth, she made the decision that would change all our lives forever. This morning, I had been on the phone with the lawyer, discussing how to handle the situation with Karen, when I heard Sarah scream. I dropped the phone and ran outside to see Karen standing 50 feet from our cabin, pointing a hunting rifle at my wife and daughter. Sarah was holding Emma protectively, backing toward the cabin. "You people have pushed me too far." Karen screamed, her face twisted with rage. "I've worked too hard to let trash like you ruin everything." "Karen, please," Sarah pleaded, her voice shaking with terror. "Don't do this. Emma is just a baby. She's better off without parents like you." Karen snarled, raising the rifle to her shoulder. Time seemed to slow down as I watched the scene unfold. I was too far away to reach them in time. I could only watch in horror as Karen's finger tightened on the trigger. The first shot echoed across the meadow like thunder. Sarah stumbled backward, blood spreading across her white t-shirt. But even as she fell, she held Emma close, trying to protect our daughter with her own body. "No!" I screamed, running toward them. Karen fired again. This second shot was meant for Emma, but Sarah had twisted as she fell, and the bullet struck her instead. She collapsed to the ground, Emma crying beneath her. Karen was reloading when I reached them. I threw myself over my wife and daughter, expecting to feel the impact of another bullet. Instead, I heard sirens in the distance. Someone had called the police. Karen hesitated, looking around wildly as the sound of approaching vehicles grew louder. Then she dropped the rifle and ran toward her car. I gathered Sarah and Emma in my arms, Sarah's blood soaking through my shirt. Emma was crying but appeared unharmed. Sarah's breathing was shallow, her face pale. "The baby," she whispered. "Is Emma okay?" "She's fine," I assured her, tears streaming down my face. "You saved her. You saved our little girl." "I love you both," Sarah managed to say before her eyes closed. The paramedics arrived minutes later, followed by the police. As they worked to stabilize Sarah, I learned that our nearest neighbor, an elderly man named Pete who lived 5 miles away, had heard the gunshots and called 911. The police found Karen trying to flee in her car. She was arrested without resistance, though she continued to rant about HOA violations even as they put her in handcuffs. "You don't understand," she shouted as they led her away. "They're destroying the neighborhood. They have to be stopped." While Sarah was being airlifted to the trauma center in the city, I sat in the back of a police car holding Emma and trying to process what had happened. The investigating officer, Detective Martinez, was taking my statement when his phone rang. "Mr. Johnson," he said after ending the call, "I just spoke with your lawyer." He explained about the property ownership situation. "I have to ask, did Ms. Hutchinson know that you own this land?" "No," I replied. "I only found out myself yesterday. I never had a chance to tell her." Detective Martinez shook his head in disbelief. "So she shot your family while standing on land that you own, trying to enforce HOA rules that she had no legal authority to create." The full weight of the tragedy was beginning to sink in. Karen had destroyed so many lives over something that was built entirely on lies and misunderstanding. If she had simply asked, if she had approached us with kindness instead of hostility, she would have learned the truth. Instead, her hatred and need for control had driven her to attempted murder. I spent the next 18 hours at the hospital, holding Emma while doctors fought to save Sarah's life. She had been shot twice, once in the chest and once in the abdomen. The bullets had missed her vital organs by millimeters, but she had lost a tremendous amount of blood. Friends and family arrived throughout the day, offering support and trying to help with Emma. But I couldn't bring myself to let go of my daughter. She was the only thing that felt real, the only thing keeping me anchored to sanity. Sarah survived the surgery, but the doctors warned that her recovery would be long and difficult. She would need multiple operations and months of rehabilitation. Even then, there was no guarantee she would ever be the same. As I sat beside her hospital bed, watching her sleep with tubes and wires attached to her body, I thought about how quickly everything had changed. This morning, we had been a happy family enjoying a peaceful morning at our cabin. Now Sarah was fighting for her life, and our daughter would grow up with the trauma of this day. The local news picked up the story, and it quickly went viral on social media. HOA Karen shoots family on land she doesn't own became a headline that appeared on news sites across the country. People were outraged by Karen's actions and shocked by the irony of the situation. But all the attention felt meaningless to me. Social media outrage wouldn't heal Sarah's wounds or erase Emma's trauma. It wouldn't give us back the peaceful life we had built at our cabin. Detective Martinez visited me at the hospital the next day with updates on the case. Karen had been charged with 2 counts of attempted murder and a host of other crimes. Her lawyer was already discussing a plea bargain, but the detective assured me that she would spend many years in prison. "There's something else you should know," Detective Martinez said. "We executed a search warrant on Ms. Hutchinson's property. We found extensive files on your family, photographs, detailed notes about your daily routines, even sketches of your cabin's layout. She had been planning something like this for weeks." The revelation that Karen had been stalking us so extensively was chilling. I realized how close we had come to losing everything, and how lucky we were that Emma had survived unharmed. Over the following days, as Sarah slowly began to recover, I had time to think about what we would do next. The cabin that had once been our refuge now felt tainted by violence. Every time I looked at the meadow where Sarah had been shot, I saw her falling, saw the blood on the grass. But Sarah, even in her weakened state, had different ideas. "I don't want her to win," she whispered one afternoon when I suggested we might sell the property and move somewhere else. "This is our home. This is Emma's inheritance. We can't let fear drive us away. But every time we're there, we'll remember." "We'll remember that I survived," Sarah interrupted. "We'll remember that our love was stronger than her hate." As Sarah continued to recover, I began to understand the full extent of what my grandfather had left me. The 50,000-acre ranch was not just land, it was a legacy. It included forests, meadows, streams, and wildlife habitat that had been protected for generations. My grandfather had been a conservationist who had worked to preserve this wilderness for future generations. The lawyer explained that several environmental groups had been hoping to purchase parts of the ranch to create a nature preserve. There were also opportunities for sustainable logging, ecotourism, and agricultural ventures that could provide income while protecting the land's natural beauty. Most importantly, I learned that my grandfather had included a provision in his will that would establish a foundation to maintain and protect the property in perpetuity. The foundation would ensure that the land would never be developed or destroyed, but would remain a sanctuary for wildlife and future generations to enjoy. As I read through my grandfather's papers, I found a letter he had written specifically for me. "Dear Michael, if you are reading this, then I am gone and this land is now yours. I hope you will find the same peace and happiness here that I did. This place has the power to heal, to restore, and to remind us of what is truly important in life. The land doesn't belong to us, we belong to the land. I trust you to protect it and pass it on to your children, just as my grandfather passed it on to me." Those words took on new meaning after everything we had been through. Karen had tried to impose her vision of community on land that was meant to remain wild and free. She had seen our simple cabin as a problem to be solved, when in reality, it represented exactly what this place was meant to be, a refuge from the artificiality and stress of modern life. 3 months after the shooting, Sarah was finally able to return home. She still needed a wheelchair and would require months of physical therapy, but the doctors were optimistic about her recovery. Emma, now 9 months old, had no memory of the traumatic day, though I knew we would have to tell her the story someday. The day we returned to the cabin, I was nervous about how Sarah would react. But as we drove up the familiar dirt road and saw our little home nestled among the pine trees, she smiled for the first time since the shooting. "It's still beautiful," she said softly. "It's still home." We had made some changes to the cabin during Sarah's recovery. I had installed a security system and built a better road to ensure emergency vehicles could reach us quickly if needed. I had also hired a caretaker named Jim, a retired park ranger, to help with maintenance and to provide an extra presence on the property. Most significantly, I had established the Whispering Pines Nature Preserve, using the foundation my grandfather had envisioned. The preserve would protect the entire 50,000 acres while allowing limited public access for hiking, camping, and environmental education. It would provide jobs for local people and bring positive attention to the area. Karen's fake HOA had dissolved the moment she was arrested. The few people who had joined her crusade quietly disappeared, embarrassed by their association with her. The other residents in the area, the ones who had been manipulated by Karen's lies, reached out to apologize and to ask if they could remain on the land as tenants. I met with each of them personally. Most were good people who had been misled by Karen's claims of authority. They had genuinely believed they were helping to improve the community. I offered them long-term leases at reasonable rates, with the understanding that they would help protect and preserve the natural environment. One of them, a young couple named David and Lisa, had been particularly helpful during Sarah's recovery. They had volunteered to help with errands and had even babysat Emma during some of my hospital visits. When I offered them a permanent place on the preserve, they broke down in tears. "We were so ashamed of what happened," Lisa said. "We should have known that Karen was wrong. We should have tried harder to get to know you and Sarah instead of just listening to her complaints." "You couldn't have known," I assured them. Karen was very convincing. "What matters now is how we move forward together." The preserve officially opened 6 months after the shooting. Sarah, though still recovering, insisted on attending the dedication ceremony. As we stood together on the porch of our cabin, looking out at the meadow where she had almost died, she squeezed my hand. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said. The ceremony was attended by hundreds of people, conservationists, local officials, families with children, and nature lovers from across the region. As I spoke about the preserve's mission and my grandfather's vision, I saw Emma in Sarah's arms, looking out at the crowd with curious eyes. This land would be Emma's inheritance someday, but more than that, it would be a legacy for all the children who would visit the preserve, learn about nature, and develop a love for the wilderness. Karen had tried to control and destroy, but we were choosing to share and preserve. In my speech, I talked about the importance of community, real community, built on mutual respect and understanding rather than rules and enforcement. I talked about the healing power of nature and the responsibility we all share to protect the environment for future generations. But mostly, I talked about Sarah's courage and strength, and how her refusal to be defeated by hatred had inspired the creation of something beautiful and lasting. "My wife was shot while protecting our daughter," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "She could have chosen to let fear and anger consume her. Instead, she chose hope. She chose to believe that this place could still be a sanctuary, not just for our family, but for everyone who needs to find peace in the natural world." The crowd erupted in applause and I saw tears in many eyes. Sarah was crying too, but they were tears of joy and pride. After the ceremony, as the sun was setting over the mountains, we sat on our porch with Emma between us. The meadow was filled with families enjoying picnics, children playing, and people simply sitting quietly and appreciating the beauty around them. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Karen had just knocked on our door and introduced herself properly?" Sarah asked. I thought about it for a moment. She might have become a friend. She might have been one of the people here today helping us celebrate. Instead, she's in prison. Karen had been sentenced to 25 years for the shooting. Her lawyer had tried to argue that she was mentally ill, and perhaps that was true. But mental illness didn't excuse her actions or erase the trauma she had caused our family. I had chosen not to attend her sentencing. Some people thought I should have been there to face her, to let her know how much damage she had done. But I preferred to focus on building something positive rather than dwelling on her destructive legacy. Do you think she understands now? Sarah asked. About the land ownership, I mean? I don't know, I admitted. I'm not sure it would matter to her if she did. She was so consumed with being right, with being in control, that she couldn't see past her own anger. As the evening grew darker, the families in the meadow began to pack up their picnics and head home. Soon it was just us again, our little family in our cabin, surrounded by the vast wilderness that was now both our home and our responsibility. Emma had fallen asleep in Sarah's arms, and I carried her inside to her crib. When I returned to the porch, Sarah was looking up at the stars, which were brilliant in the clear mountain air. I'm grateful, she said simply. For what? For everything. For surviving. For Emma being safe. For this place. For the chance to make something good come from something terrible. I sat down beside her and took her hand. The physical wounds had healed, but I knew that the emotional scars would always be with us. There were still nights when Sarah woke up from nightmares, still moments when unexpected sounds made us both tense with fear. But there were also moments like this, quiet evenings when we could appreciate how fortunate we were to be together, to be alive, to have the opportunity to create something meaningful from tragedy. A year later, the Whispering Pines Nature Preserve had become a model for conservation efforts across the country. We had established hiking trails, camping areas, and an environmental education center. Scientists came to study the wildlife, families came to reconnect with nature, and people from all walks of life found peace and healing in the wilderness. Sarah had made a full recovery and had become the preserve's director of community outreach. She organized programs for schools, led nature walks for visitors, and worked with other conservation groups to expand protection for wilderness areas throughout the region. Emma, now a toddler, was growing up with the forest as her playground. She knew the names of the birds and could identify different types of trees. She had no fear of the outdoors, no sense that this place had ever been anything but safe and welcoming. Sometimes, when I watched Emma playing in the meadow where Sarah had been shot, I marveled at the resilience of the human spirit. A place that had been marked by violence and hatred had been transformed into a symbol of hope and renewal. The other residents of the preserve had become genuine friends and partners in our mission. David and Lisa had established an organic farm that supplied fresh produce to visitors and local restaurants. An elderly artist named Margaret had opened a studio where she taught children to paint landscapes and wildlife. A young man named Carlos, who had been studying forestry, became our head of trail maintenance and wildlife management. We were a real community now, bound together not by arbitrary rules and enforcement, but by shared values and mutual support. When someone needed help, neighbors appeared without being asked. When decisions needed to be made about the preserve, we talked through issues together until we found solutions that worked for everyone. This was what Karen had claimed to want, a thriving community where people took pride in their surroundings and worked together for the common good. But she had been so focused on control and conformity that she had been unable to see what real community actually looked like. One evening, as I was putting Emma to bed, she pointed out her window toward the meadow and said, "Pretty flowers, Daddy." Sarah had replanted her garden in the same spot where Karen had poisoned the original plants. But instead of just vegetables, she had created a memorial garden with wildflowers, herbs, and a small fruit tree. A simple stone bench sat among the plants with a plaque that read, "In gratitude for second chances and the healing power of love." "Yes, sweetheart," I told Emma. "Mommy's flowers are very pretty." "Mommy's strong," Emma said using one of her favorite phrases. "Yes, Mommy is very strong." As I tucked Emma into her crib, I thought about the story I would tell her someday about the day she and her mother had almost been taken from me. It would be a difficult conversation, but I knew it was important for her to understand both the tragedy and the triumph that had shaped her early life. I would tell her about Karen, but not to frighten her or to teach her to hate. I would tell her the story as a lesson about the importance of kindness, communication, and understanding. I would explain how fear and anger can corrupt people's hearts and lead them to do terrible things, but also how love and forgiveness can create beauty from ashes. Most importantly, I would tell her about her mother's courage, how Sarah had protected her with her own body, and how she had chosen hope over despair, healing over hatred. Standing on our porch that night, looking out at the peaceful preserve where hundreds of people now came each month to find rest and renewal, I realized that we had won. Not in the sense of defeating an enemy, but in the deeper sense of refusing to let evil have the final word. Karen had tried to destroy our family and our home. Instead, her actions had led to the creation of something far more beautiful and meaningful than we had ever imagined. The 50,000 acres that my grandfather had protected would now be preserved forever, providing sanctuary for wildlife and humans alike for generations to come. Sarah joined me on the porch and we stood together in comfortable silence, listening to the sound of the wind in the pine trees and the distant call of an owl. Somewhere in the darkness, a family of deer grazed peacefully in the meadow, unafraid and protected. "Do you think Emma will want to live here when she grows up?" Sarah asked. "I hope so," I replied. "But if she chooses to live somewhere else, this place will still be here for her children, and their children after them. Your grandfather's legacy. Our legacy now." As we prepared to go inside, Sarah paused and looked back at the memorial garden, barely visible in the moonlight. "Sometimes I think about what I would say to Karen if I could see her again," she said. "What would you say?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I think I would thank her." Thank her? I was surprised by this. For showing us how strong we really are. For forcing us to discover this amazing inheritance. For bringing us together with people who have become true friends. For giving us the opportunity to create something that will outlast all of us. I thought about this as we went inside and prepared for bed. In a strange way, Sarah was right. Karen's hatred had inadvertently led to the creation of something filled with love. Her attempt to destroy had resulted in preservation and protection. Her cruelty had been transformed into compassion. That didn't excuse what Karen had done or minimize the trauma she had caused. But it demonstrated something powerful about the human capacity to find meaning and create good even from the worst circumstances. As I lay in bed that night, listening to Sarah's steady breathing and Emma's soft sighs from her crib, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. We had been given a second chance as a family, and we hadn't wasted it. We had taken the worst day of our lives and used it as the foundation for building something beautiful. The Whispering Pines Nature Preserve would stand as a testament to the power of love over hate, of creation over destruction, of community over conflict. And at its heart would always be our little cabin, the home where a young family had refused to be broken by violence and had chosen instead to build a legacy of hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to serve the land and the people who found healing in its wilderness. There would be difficult days ahead, moments when the memories of that terrible morning would resurface and remind us of how fragile life can be. But there would also be sunrises over the mountains, children's laughter echoing through the trees, families gathering around campfires to share stories, and countless moments of peace and beauty in the sanctuary we had created. Karen had shot my wife and baby, unaware that she stood on land that belonged to us. In trying to take everything away from us, she had actually given us the chance to discover riches beyond measure. Not just the 50,000 acres of wilderness, but the knowledge that love is stronger than hate, that healing is possible after even the deepest wounds, and that from the ashes of tragedy can grow something more beautiful than we ever dared to imagine. This was our story now, not a story of victimhood but a story of triumph. Not a story of loss, but a story of love that multiplied and grew until it encompassed thousands of acres and touched thousands of lives. As I drifted off to sleep, I smiled, knowing that tomorrow Emma would wake up in her crib, Sarah would tend her memorial garden, and another day would begin in our sanctuary among the whispering pines.